Witam na kanale Marek, Meram.
In his interview with Tucker Carlson, President Putin told a lot of lies about Poland and Polish history. Here they are. First, President Putin blamed Poland for the Second World War. The truth is this: it was Poland which was a victim of a treacherous attack. Millions of Polish people were killed in the war. Details. In spring 1939, just before the Second World War, Western allies tricked Poland into resisting Germany, promising military help. Yes, Germany offered Poland a treaty, as Putin said, but it was another trick and was going to later serve as a cause of war. It was Germany, the Third Reich, which was responsible for the Second World War, not Poland. Just after their unprovoked attack on Poland, Nazis, who came from Germany and Austria, started to destroy Poland and Polish people on a mass scale. For the first 2 years of the war, Polish people were persecuted much more than Jews. Auschwitz concentration camp was built initially for Polish people, and Poles were the first victims there. Also, for the first 2 years, the majority of inmates were Polish. This is the truth hidden by propaganda. Many millions of Polish people died during the war. Estimates are difficult, but the number may even be 15 million citizens of Poland. I will say more about Polish people helping Jews later on. Of course, in this interview, President Putin was whitewashing Russia and the Soviet Union. What he did not say is that on August 23, 1939, just before the Second World War, the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany signed a top-secret agreement. This Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was about the Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union dividing Poland among both of them. So, two giants crushed Poland between them. This is what enabled the Second World War to break out, an agreement signed by two powers which would only later become enemies. Again, no Poland's fault. Conversely, both totalitarian states breached non-aggression treaties with Poland, like true felons. As a result of this Soviet betrayal, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Polish people were sent for death to Soviet labor camps in freezing Siberia. Mr. Putin, you are telling blatant lies upon lies. You don't know the history at all. Second, President Putin talked about alleged collaboration between Poland and Adolf H. Can't say the name on YouTube. The truth is this: it's nonsense. Millions of Polish people died because of Nazi German persecution, as I said earlier. Poland was occupied by Germany for the 6 years of war, and the Polish people were putting up heroic fight against the Nazi Germany with unprecedented courage and humanity. For example, millions of Poles literally risked their lives to save Jews. Details about it later on. If it concerns diplomatic relations, the situation was much more complicated. By oversimplifying, you are manipulating, Mr. Putin, and you know it full well. Poland fell into a trap, got entangled in a thick web of diplomatic tricks. Polish government, manipulated backstage by some groups in the West, particularly in Great Britain, acted to their benefit and to the loss of Polish people. Today Poland is still influenced by the West, the USA, Great Britain, Germany, etc., which forced the government of Poland to act against Polish national interest. Third, President Putin painted the following picture: poor Ukrainians persecuted by Poles. The truth is this: for centuries Polish people were ruthlessly massacred by the inhabitants of that region. Details: the farther to the east, the wilder that region was, and the people became more and more cruel. Especially so-called Cossacks were mostly bandits, thieves, and so on. They did not have morality, they did not see anything wrong with the shocking atrocities committed by some of them on regular peasants. When Polish military were restoring order and punishing the notorious Cossacks, according to the strict law of that time, they claimed to be persecuted without reason. But now and still, for political propaganda goals, it's enough to claim that they were as innocent as angels, right? Massacres of Polish people and Jews took place particularly in the 1600s and 1700s, for example the gruesome Kolivszczyzna in 1768 with up to 200,000 victims. The Polish justified retaliation on the perpetrators of those massacres was always much smaller. For example, in the Kolivszczyzna case, there were only a couple thousand victims of Poles, so the proportion in the number of victims of both sides was 20 or even 100 to 1. Characteristic of the people living then in that region was blind extreme hatred towards Polish people and indiscriminate destruction. They were burning everything Polish to the ground, even slaughtering quote-unquote Polish animals, cows, pigs, and so on. Massacres on civil inhabitants of Polish towns and devastation of entire lands. They were encouraged by the Orthodox Church. Some of the rebellions were staged by Russia. People there were often not Ruthenians, not Slavic people, but rather the descendants of wild and cruel tribes from Asia, which for centuries were looting that region. Russia took advantage of that to destroy Polish state. Ukrainian state was a German-Austrian creature from the beginning of the 20th century. They created it to carry out German-Austrian policy of influencing this part of Europe, antagonizing and weakening it. As President Putin said, it was Lenin who directly created Ukrainian Soviet Republic, but it is well known that he was a secret agent of the West, of German and American bankers. In the new Ukrainian state, the leading force became not Slavic Ruthenians, but nationalists. Fanatic Ukrainian nationalism was the cause of the most horrifying genocide in history, the Volhynia massacre. It was a slaughter of Polish people which happened in 1939 through 1947, so during the Second World War. Here on YouTube I am not allowed to tell you how gruesome, inhuman, demonic, sadistic methods of slaughtering Polish people were used by Ukrainians. President Putin mentioned this genocide at an economic forum in June 2023. In total 130,000 Polish victims are known by name, and many more were murdered, so to say, anonymously. It's impossible to know exactly how many. The number of victims may be even 500,000, the number given by the first president of Ukraine 30 years ago. The specific goal of the Ukrainian organizers of that genocide was to forever terrify Polish people with the intensity of atrocities. The goal was also to physically wipe out Poles who had lived there sometimes even for centuries, including burning Polish villages down, burning their breeding animals down, even cutting down orchards. So many people, by far mostly women, children and the elderly, died in extreme suffering. Ukrainian nationalists were helped by Ukrainian peasants on a mass scale, as if they were hypnotized, in an inhuman, demonic killing frenzy. There are many testimonies of Polish survivors, eyewitnesses, describing, for example, Ukrainian peasants walking through cereal as if during harvest and mercilessly slaughtering everybody. Of course, nowadays Ukrainian propaganda twists and outright denies those facts and the truth about this terrifying genocide. They fake or destroy documents. They have blocked exhumations of Polish victims, claiming the current war as the cause, but the war is not preventing them from carrying out exhumations of German Nazi soldiers. Ukrainian government has blocked the exhumations of Polish victims because they would clearly show that the victims were children, women and the elderly, tortured before death in a horrifying way. They have blocked the exhumations in spite of all the kind and unpaid help that Poland has been offering to Ukraine during the current war and humanitarian crisis when millions of Ukrainians flooded Poland. Ukrainian government says that 90 years ago Polish state did not promote Ukrainians to state offices, and also says it was brutal persecution. But they do not say that it was an effect of other endless acts of Ukrainian cruelty committed on Poles by Ukrainian nationalists for decades before. Think about it. How could you promote terrorists to state offices? How? At the time of World War II, Ukrainian troops were well known for their horrible cruelty. By the way, Ukrainians were collaborating with German Nazis and helping them. Mr. Putin has this one right. At 56 minutes into the interview with Mr. Carlson. But even Germans were unable to believe anyone could be so brutally cruel. Ukrainian troops participated in suppressing the Great Polish Warsaw Uprising in 1944. You can read many accounts of heaps of corpses and torturing Polish people. Again, I'm not allowed to provide the details here on YouTube. It's forbidden and censored. Mr. Putin perpetuates the propaganda of Ukrainian government, which builds Ukrainian national identity on the alleged nasty mischief done by Poles. The truth is, those noblemen who centuries ago treated not so kindly Ruthenian peasants living in the present-day Ukraine were often Ruthenian themselves and not quote-unquote Polish masters. They were Ruthenian and they persecuted their own Ruthenian fellow countrymen. They were Ruthenian but posed to be Polish because that meant higher status. They were just snobs. What's more, those strict noblemen acted according to the severe law of the times. Another thing is that for many Polish noblemen, religious Christian ethics prevented them from being cruel. Of course, I'm not saying that Polish noblemen were saints. We are talking about the world of a couple of hundreds of years ago, and back then generally people were taking advantage of other people. Still the same today, by the way. But I think that due to Polish traditions of tolerance, Polish noblemen were taking advantage of other people to a lesser degree than, say, English noblemen of other people, and certainly to a lesser degree than Russian noblemen of other people. For a few centuries, Poland was a refuge for Jews and other people fleeing from religious persecution, so blaming Poles for being cruel on any larger scale is particularly unfair, let alone untrue. Poland of the 15th to 18th centuries is called a country with no stakes, like the stakes to burn witches at. This interview with President Putin generally denigrates and slanders Poland, probably for political reasons, like for decades in the West. So before I go on to Poles and Jews, during World War II, I would like to briefly mention 3 facts from Polish history. First fact: in 1920, near Warsaw, the bravery of Polish soldiers and the brilliant movement devised by the Polish military headquarters saved the West from destruction brought by inhuman Bolsheviks. Does anyone in the West know that? Second fact: German death camps were located in the former territory of Poland, occupied by the Nazi Germany, and were run by Germans and Austrians with the help of others, such as Ukrainians. Do people in the West know that, or are they hypnotized by propaganda? Poland was occupied by Germany and did not have its own Polish government at all. Third fact: Polish military officer Pilecki voluntarily went to Auschwitz concentration camp to learn what was happening behind the wires and give this truth to the world. Imagine, could you leave your family and sacrifice yourself for your fellow human beings, Jews, Poles, and others? Could you? A hero, a superhuman. In recent years, some organizations in the West have been trying to blame Poland for killing Jews during World War II. However, as I said earlier, millions of Polish people literally risked their lives to save Jews. Poland was the only country where German occupiers by law punished helping Jews by death. Why? Because Polish people were helping Jews on a mass scale. Today Poles have the highest number of the Yad Vashem, the righteous among the nations, titles in the world, and many more are pending, have been blocked. Not Polish people, but Nazis, meaning Germans and Austrians, should be blamed for the Holocaust of the Jews. In 2018, after a conference of Jewish European communities, among others Jewish historians concluded that blaming for the Holocaust other nations than Germans is anti-Semitism. During the Second World War, Polish exile government established the Żegota Council, the only organization which helped Jews in Europe occupied by Germans. You can read that even on Wikipedia. And one more thing, a Jewish humanitarian activist, Shmuel Zygielboim, wrote in his book in 1942, so 3 years into World War II. I must mention here that the Polish population gives all possible help and sympathy to the Jews. The Polish and the Jewish masses continue to fight together for common aims, just as they have fought for so many years in the past. Polish people were the only nation besides Greeks and Czechs who have never become soldiers of the Third Reich out of their own will, while Nazis had tens of thousands of volunteers from France, Belgium and the Netherlands, Holland. I have already mentioned that Ukrainians were collaborating with German Nazis and helping them as Nazi soldiers. Another topic. Fourth, in the interview, President Putin was blurring the lines in definitions. There were and are 2 distinct groups, Ruthenians and Russians. The region of Ukraine or the Grand Duchy of Lithuania were inhabited by Ruthenians, not Russians. Ruthenians are not Russians. Despite a similar name, Russia comes from Moscow. Initially it was the Principality of Moscow and the Grand Duchy of Moscow. The name Russia appeared only in the middle of the 16th century, after more than 300 years. It's a different state than Ruthenia and Novgorod, which Mr. Putin based his story on. Proof: massacre of Novgorod in 1570, carried out by Russian forces under Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible. Fifth, it's true that Cossack leader Khmelnytsky in the middle of the 17th century chose to go under Russian rule to free himself from Polish authority. But very quickly he and other leaders made up their minds that Polish rule had been a paradise compared to the terror of the new Russian rule. However, internal disputes among Ruthenians living in the present-day Ukraine caused them to reject their own state within Poland offered them by Polish people. That region became an arena for massacres and destruction brought by various military forces. Under Polish rule, they at least had the right to be dissatisfied. Under Russian rule, only adoring the Tsar was allowed, along with absolute obedience, otherwise death. To round off two more facts. The Bolsheviks and Stalin created one of the most cruel, most inhuman totalitarian states in history. Some estimate the number of victims of Stalinist regime to be above 20 million people. But in general, I heard Mr. Putin only say that maybe some mistakes had been made in that period of Russian history. The other thing, while talking about Polish-German relations, Mr. Putin spoke about the Polish city of Gdańsk as if it had been illegally taken from Germans. No, Gdańsk was a Polish city for at least 800 years, and only in 1793 was it taken by German Prussia and the name changed to Danzig, albeit with an interlude for the rule of the murderous and treacherous Teutonic Order in the Middle Ages. Mr. Putin, you know very little about history. You also confused many important dates in history. You have no encyclopedic knowledge, as Mr. Carlson put it, at all. Mr. Carlson, don't you please bolster someone's lies by saying that you have been under the impression that he was being honest. It's only your naive opinion. You know nothing about the true history of Poland. Please don't spit at the memory of millions of Poles who were murdered because they had the courage to remain kind human beings in spite of the atrocities of war rampaging all around them. This is all that I would like to say. Have a good day to all of you, and have a good thing. Wake up.